Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Miss Education Podcast. I'm your host, Victoria. And on the Miss Education Podcast, we talk all things education, meaning schools, school systems, teaching, communities, and a place where we get to dissect challenges, futuristic ideas, and other social justice matters. Today, we are talking about what is it going to take to change education? We are with Arnelle Jones, pronouns they and she. They're a teacher, education consultant, and deep critical thinker. In Arnelle's spare time, they like to do stand up comedy and talk too loud in public. I met Arnelle at Harvard, and I have not yet been more impressed with someone's mind and ability to think in new ways. So, welcome, Arnelle. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm happy to be here. Happy to chat.
Thank you. So, in terms of what is it going to take to change education, I chose you to co host this episode with me because you're such a critical thinker and you always think in new ways that I've literally never thought about before. And I want to start with kind of more of a jarring question. Should we tear it down? Should we tear down education? Should we start from the beginning? What does that mean? Is it even realistic? You know, when we talk about reform versus just starting over again, is reform a cop out? Like, is reform one of those things where you're like, okay, you're going to change the system that's already built? It's not possible. Like, are we using the master's tools to try and get out of the master's house?
Oh my God. Like, first of all, do you even need me here?
No.
Because, like, girl, don't even bury the lead. Like, lead up front. Should we just tear it down? Well, honestly, I think the answer is, of course, yes. But often, in those circumstances, the next question is like, will we do what it takes to tear something down appropriately? That's usually no.
Right.
And I think education is no different. Like, of course, it needs to be deconstructed and we need to start over. But the main reason that I think that should be the case is because entirely we have lost the plot. And I
Okay.
think that that's not something that people like to hear, but
Right.
it's true. We have lost the plot. And foundationally, the question that we should ask again and remind ourselves of is like, what is the purpose of educating and schooling in the first place?
Right.
And also, what purpose should that serve now? And how can we meet the moment now in the way that people who designed and framed education at the inception of their schooling in the inception, how they responded to their moment. So, like, I don't know. I think that's like the first thing. It's like, you know, what is the plot? Why did we decide to do schooling and education this way? Is that relevant now? And like, if it's not relevant, then what are we actually trying to do with schooling and education? And I think that's the first thing.
Yeah.
I think personally, as Arnelle, education's purpose in this society, especially for children going through the school system, is to equip them with not only basic knowledge of like math, English, etc., but also equip them to be effective decision makers for themselves and for their community. And are we doing that now? No.
Right. Right. And you would know because in your job, you're actually looking at different school systems, different school boards in different states across the United States. And you're noticing the gaps, noticing what's working, what's not working. And overwhelmingly, I assume it's not working, i.e., the need and gap for education consultants. Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, yeah, unfortunately, my job is very safe in this world that doesn't decide to just deconstruct things that don't work. Um, so I think there is one aspect that I think the industry that I work in kind of responds to, and that's a lot of the technical approach to education. Like, what is it going to take to make sure that people have the resources they need to do the things they want to do? Or, like,
Right.
how can we make sure that there isn't inequity in the way those resources are distributed and managed and how people make decisions with them? And so, a lot of my work in consulting and with the company I work for, Education Research Strategies, which I am here as a representative of myself and not them, Arnelle. We work with a lot of people at like the district administrative level and help them, you know, bridge the gap between policy and implementation, or try to help them reform the way that they're doing things, or assessing how they're doing things. So I think those technical like aspects are helpful and they do have a lot of strong impact. But again, going back to our first, like, main question here is that what it's going to take to equip students to be, full, better, best decision makers for themselves and their community? No, because
Mm-hmm.
that's only a sliver of education, and you can only do so much there. But
Right.
foundationally, we all have to agree that that schooling's purpose is to not only enable people to make decisions, but be critical thinkers as they're making those decisions.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
more work there.
Yeah. And when we talked about what was the purpose of education, right? In
Mhm.
Inception, maybe education was more about building concrete skills to go and do one specific thing in the world, right? How can you go to school, learn this trade specifically to be the nurse, right? In your community, to be the teacher. Maybe you're going to learn how to teach. Like there's clear things. Now it's so much more open. There are jobs that exist now that didn't exist 3 years ago, 5 years ago, right? So it's not
Yeah.
like we're in school preparing students to be the DEI leader of their town, right? Like they're
Yeah.
still learning the same skills, which is not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing to still learn the basics, the maths, but I do wonder what is the purpose now, like you said, to be a deep and critical thinker, and then to what end, right? Like,
Yeah.
are they the generation under us, so Gen Z,
Mm-hmm.
they're not working like we are. Like they're not working in the same way.
The
They're not
girls are not
excited
working.
to
They
do
don't want to
nine to
work
five.
anymore.
Kim said no one wants to work anymore. And it's true, but not in a bad way.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we preparing them to do? I know that, most of Gen Z is out of school. I mean, they're in the tail end, but I do wonder about what kind of jobs or what kind of things are we preparing them for? I don't really know. I don't really know.
Honestly, I think like going back to like the more traditional model of schooling, like where that came from, and I'm not going to quote anybody's names or any years because no,
Okay.
didn't do that type of graduate level research before this. But
Yeah.
hear me out here. This is just like what I like to call like on the pavement type of philosophical preaching. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like
Yeah.
I feel like in my past life I was like Socrates them, just like speaking
Absolutely.
and giving
Yeah.
my thoughts and parables about the world
Yeah.
without facts. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think going back to like the original model of schooling, students, it was basically not necessarily to prepare them for like jobs per se, but in the older days, it's preparing them to be better workers and less of a liability. Because if you
Right.
cannot read and can't do basic math, then you can't work in this factory. You're gonna kill us. So
Right.
like because of that, we needed people to know these things. And so we put them in school so they can learn these basic writing, reading, and arithmetics so they can go out and be better workers. And then from there, there was the idea of getting more people into higher education and doing these other more, middle class, upper middle class jobs, doctor, lawyer, nurse, etc. And then it's about like an economic advantage, like get yourself out of poverty,
Mm-hmm.
pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work, go harder, go higher. And I think the problem that of course ran up against in our generation, millennials, Gen Z, Alpha, and beyond, is the fact that those promised fruits of that labor aren't necessarily true. Like the economy isn't built to support like, oh, work hard and like build your way up. There's all of these traps and pitfalls and secret dealings and nepotism, cronyism, all this other stuff in the world that doesn't really, it muddies up that direct path from like working hard, getting a college degree, and moving up the ladder. And it makes it less attractive and less desirable because it seems, one, unattainable, and two, false, which you can't mislead people into something and expect they're going to stay there or want to be there. So I think like that model is, again, it's fallen apart because it's not like it's not reliable, first of all, and second, like you mentioned, there's so many other types of careers that don't have like a direct trajectory or linear path toward. And to me, I think it's more so about like the I guess economy, society, etc. is going to continue to evolve. There's going to continue to be jobs that we can't conceptualize right now. So it's not that you have to tailor to specific skills to get those jobs, but rather you have to be able to teach children how to understand like Actually, let me rephrase how I'm trying to say that. Because it's not necessarily that you need to teach them how to be a consultant. What you need to teach them how to do is be able to take information in, decipher information, and make decisions based on the analysis that they've done themselves, like critical thinking.
Yeah.
That's the underlying, I guess, skill set of a lot of these jobs. Like, even as a consultant, I think you can learn how to do Excel, but that doesn't make you a good consultant. It's your ability to ask good questions tailored to information that you have observed and analyzed, and answer those questions and present like data informed analyses. That's not a job, it's more so like a process and way of thinking. And that, I think, is what we're not doing when we have this like traditional schooling model that just pushes out better workers, or the idea that you're selling them a dream of like, if you do good in high school, then you go to college and do well. Meanwhile, we got several $100s worth of debt that's telling us different, you know? Instead, you have to be able to teach students how to know themselves, observe themselves, and understand themselves enough to know what they want, what their capacities are, where their desires lie, and then be able to look at their environment, understand and take in information of their environment, assess it, analyze it effectively, and then make decisions for how to proceed. Does college make sense for me? Yay or nay? Do I have the foundational understanding of, I don't know, postgraduate trajectory to know what that path means and assess it against a different path? I don't think a lot of students necessarily know that that's the skill that you should practice, more so than it is knowing the Pythagorean theorem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, up to a certain point, that's very good to know. I feel like around middle school is when we start to like we really need to hammer in that critical thinking stuff, you know, and kind of like, I don't know, approach schooling a lot more innovatively to enable this sort of like individuals who are prepared to approach the world in that kind of way. But
Yeah.
so many other domains have to like agree on that output.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And I think they all inform each other. So if you don't have the universities that agree with, let's say, the courses, right? Because we have, I don't know about you, sorry, but we have certain required courses before you go to university, right? But let's just say that you're not interested in doing, I don't know, an English degree, but we have to take English, right? And so if even the other domain, like let's say the university, the post-secondary, if they have to also agree with the ways that we want to teach or the ways that we innovate to say, okay, this student is doing said courses, they want to specialize in said areas, they've done these courses, maybe they don't have the one course that you said is required, but like this could be a good student for your program. But we don't necessarily let people flow like that. We kind of keep the requirements and the restraints in a way that doesn't feel fitting in sometimes. But also, I wonder if the students, you know, I mean, we were both teachers, right? And students can be great, highly knowledgeable. They can also be very immature, as they are children.
Of course.
And so sometimes, you know, you're teaching high school students and you're trying to, let's talk about critical thinking. And they're like, okay, I'm on Instagram. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm not even present with you. And is it a matter of maybe they just need to be in school longer? Like, when they're
What's
more...
the issue?
Yeah, like what is the actual issue, right? Because I feel like a lot of teenagers these days are pretty apathetic about school.
Yeah.
They don't care about it. It's not something they're excited to go to. Again, schooling hasn't changed in like 200 years. So,
no.
I mean, I wouldn't be excited either if I was doing the same class as my parents in 1970 and it's now 2024 and the world looks extremely different. And I don't really know what is the solution, but even in terms of like the tear it down, how?
Yeah.
I'm such a logistic person sometimes that I'm like, wait, I love that radical idea. How?
No, literally. You know? Definitely the operationalizing of tearing something down is a lot more complicated than you think. Mainly, I think it's hard to tear things. Well, actually, you said a lot, and I'm trying to like, remember what did Victoria say? All of these things are great. Like I'll start with the point about teenagers first, and then we'll talk about like what does it take to tear things down, that part. Yeah. But I love the idea of talking more about why are teenagers like this, you know? Yeah. Because I think I had a very great opportunity to learn about teenagers when I was teaching high school. And I taught high school in the rural South. And the reason I think that's important is because I got to see high school students in their raw element. Because guess what? All they had was themselves and the internet. They didn't have nothing to do outside of school. They didn't have anywhere to go. all they had was school to like
Right.
socialize. You know, it's a very poor community. So all of their thoughts and things like that, like it's very grounded. Like they're very salt of the earth teens, even though they were very annoying. But anyway, I think what's interesting about Gen Z and beyond and why people's like critique of like them being apathetic, you have to I guess like to answer the question, we have to do some accountability ourselves as a society because first of all, going back to that narrative that we always preach about, like if you go to school, then you go to college, then you're gonna be successful, right? That was the narrative that was told. Millennials, we fell for the okie doke. We did it.
Yep.
Now we
Yep.
got debt. You know what I'm saying? Now we're crying about it.
Yeah.
They saw that. Gen
Yeah.
Z and Gen Alpha, they saw their cousins, sisters, parents, uncles
Yeah.
go through that. All these other people go through that. And so they were like, seems like a scam. Like, why should I really go to college? Like,
Yeah.
unless it's guaranteed, unless I got a scholarship that's out the butt, I don't know if this makes sense for me to try to pursue this. So there's that one part. The second part is like, look at what's happening in the world. So
Yeah.
we were taught this prosperity mindset that like college will ensure stability. Two, I mean, stability doesn't exist. And then they see stability not through like there's no proof that like there's a middle class that exists, so there's no proof there.
Right.
But they do see people get rich doing other things. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And it
Yeah.
seems like from their immature teenage perspective that there's two paths. You can either be poor and hurt and complain, or you can get money by doing things like, you know, going viral on social media, having a YouTube channel, be a content creator,
Yeah.
things like that. And again, I don't think that that's a flawed logic because there's so much evidence to this being
Right.
true.
Right.
And I think that it's not going to solve the problem if we just continue to do things as we are. And so to me, I think I guess that kind of goes into the next point about like, what is it going to take to tear things down? I think the first thing is like disruption. Like you
Right.
have to stop first.
Right.
The reason I say that is because I think what I've noticed happening in education from both like administrative teachers to, you know, district level folks, etc., is that people are aware that we've lost the plot,
Yeah.
but there is just so much pressure to keep going. It's like this. Like what are we doing?
Yeah.
I don't know, but we gotta do it faster.
Yeah.
What are we doing? I don't know, but we gotta do it harder.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's gotta be bigger. You know what I'm saying? That's what it feels like. It's just pressure. And so in response to that, people just kind of zoom in on their role and just like, well, this is all I can do. I can't fix all the other stuff. We got to get the test scores. I don't care. You know, that sort of stuff. And that just negates the interconnectedness of all of this stuff. Like education isn't something that just happens at schools. It also happens in the community. It also happens at home. It also happens in the streets. It also happens everywhere. It can't happen if you don't have adequate health care. It can't happen if you don't have adequate access to water and food. It cannot happen if you don't have shelter. So it's like, I don't know. There's like all of this stuff that's like not necessarily guaranteed. So when I say like disrupt, I mean, we have to actually stop what we're doing.
Right.
And say like, if we want to provide proper education, we have to make sure everybody has at least these basic levels or needs met. Do all of these people in this community have adequate access to food, water, shelter, and housing? And if the answer is no, then the answer is that education cannot happen here, or proper schooling cannot happen here in the way that you desire it to be. You know, I think there was a recent study that was released a couple months ago. I could be wrong. That basically said the leading indicator for success on standardized tests is just your family's wealth. And if that's the truth, then what does it matter what curriculum you buy, what, you know, stuff like that, if all you're doing is try to mitigate the truth that it's all about access. So I think first, to stop what we're doing would require people to sacrifice or like to be willing to sacrifice their need to meet these external metrics of success. So we have to do away with trying to get better, quote unquote, student outcomes.
Right.
and instead focus on like what are the students currently experiencing that they do not need to experience. And if that's hunger and if that's lack of access to shelter, then I think that means a community, not just the school system, has to get behind making sure that that's the case. And that implicates not just the school admin, it implicates the city government, it implicates the healthcare system in the community, it implicates probably the state government and federal government. And that's where people often get like checked out of the conversation, because they realize that it's actually a lot of effort to disrupt a system that's actively harming children, like the current system is. And so I don't know, I think that's the first step, is disrupting what we're doing. And then second is probably taking accountability for all of the ways that what we have done in the past has led us to this moment. Like, I feel like there's a lot of gaslighting that happens. Because they're like, oh man, these kids are messed up, after they've done so many years of messing these kids up. And then it's like, why are you so messed up, kids? What's going on? What are you doing? It's like, no, you guys have ruined these kids. You literally made them go to school during a pandemic where all of their like family members died, and like, you know, and then we just kept going. You know what I mean? That's disheartening. I wouldn't want to like be a part of a society that views us this way. If I were a teenager, I would be like, this kind of sucks, and I'm just gonna have fun and make fun of things on the internet, because at least I get some catharsis from that, and not, you know, faced with the reality that the job market that we were supposed to aspire to doesn't exist, that our politicians are like, at this point, adversarial to us. Like, I don't even know what's going on. You know what I mean? And that like there aren't protections for their basic humanity. So I don't know, like, I think we have to account for the fact that we've failed them on all of those specific ways and name those things. And I think that there, of course, has to be some repair, which people don't like to do. People don't like to do reparations, but it's true.
No, they don't.
Because again, I don't know how many studies have to prove that we're in these moments that we're in because of horrible decisions that were made in the past. Like, I even think specifically about the way the American government owes the Black community or the African American community here, right? Like, because of that neglect, people were not able to access wealth, resources, etc. Again, those same resources that correlate with student outcomes. People weren't able to access those. People were not able to like build for themselves. And because of that, you created a chasm that people have to dig themselves out of before they can effectively participate as human beings. And so to say that to them, like, I don't know, you guys figure it out while you're down there. Like, no, I think there has to be some repair. Like, you owe some people some stuff. You know what I mean? You owe some of these most neglected school systems, you owe them some repair. Like, I think that the way that, especially in America, the system has been so punitive towards districts that are struggling. Again, if the studies say that student outcomes correlate most with parental income, then why on earth have we punished poor communities so much for when their students don't have better outcomes? And it's like, you just
make it make sense. The math isn't mathing.
Just move past that, you know?
No, I think it's so many great points. I feel like it's not only, especially your last point about reparations, it's not only what you're owed in terms of doing the right thing, like the repair, but it's also what was promised. So at that point, like, how can I even trust you as a government if you promised to give me X amount of land and X amount of money and nobody got it? Right? At that point, there's no trust, right? You don't care. And you want to see me go down bad. Like, that's what it seems like at the very least. Because I'm not the kind of person who's going to be like deep in the conspiracy theory, but at the same time, it's like, you want to see me fail. Like, there's no way that you're excited to see me, you know, uprising and seeing Black people flourish when you clearly don't want to invest in our communities in any way.
And honestly, I just think that, it's really, it's insidious the way that things like that are framed, because people are like, well, my specific ancestor didn't do this. And it's like, we're also not asking for specific individuals to repair. We're asking for a government to repair. That's an entity that's not human beings, you know? The American government owes reparations, not like these specific families, you know what I mean? Because it's like a societal ill. It was the fact that it was like a de jure way to live. Slavery was law, you know what I mean? And so as that again, when they change the law, they got to repair the stuff that they
Yeah.
messed up by implementing that, and they just never did. And then they
Yeah.
just was like, well, it wasn't us specifically, so why do we have, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, well,
Yeah.
it's the same government that still exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the American government didn't die.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I also liked your point that I think students are, like you said, they see it as a scam. They see what's happened to generations above them, and they're like, we're not going to do this. Like, this is not going to work for us. And I think they're waiting for, I mean, rightfully, they're waiting for us, teachers, the people above them, to make the change. What are they going to
Yes.
do when they're 14? They're going to be like, that's nice. I'll go take a nap in my classroom. Like,
And they
there's
did. And they took that nap.
totally, because they're, what are they going to do? Are they going to go directly to the minister or the, I don't know what you call it on your side, the
superintendent?
But we should be the ones to go to the politicians and say, hey, we need a change. And I wanted to also pick up on one thing you said, where you said people want things faster and they want it right away. And they want that next step, that next solution. We are so afraid of the pause. I think we're afraid of the pause. Like, we're afraid to just say, hey, let's take inventory of what's happening here. What's happening?
And you
here?
want
What's
to know
going on,
something
right?
that's terrible. There was a time that we could have done this.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we didn't. Like, the
Right.
pandemic was a great time to be like, hey, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And does this make sense? Like, look at how much our system was upended by this event. How can we create a system that, like, I don't know, this doesn't completely destroy, when it happens. But
Yeah.
we didn't do that. We instead were like, we gotta get this economy going. We started doing the clicking again. We're like, we gotta go to work.
Yeah. There's a lack of, I think, people really taking the students as humans and not just the data points. Because I feel like I've heard so many studies, whether they are, they make sense or not. Okay, if we do double dose tutoring for 3 years, then we will get up to the speed of, and so I'm like, listen, sure, I understand tutoring is helpful. At the same time, you're adding hours to students' weeks to do only school, no personal life, no personal development and growth, no, how are they going to do extracurriculars if they're doing double dose tutoring every single day for 3 years? Right. And it's like, we're so scared to not be at the level of before. I don't know that they're going to be at the level of before. They've lost something because the world lost something. And maybe that's just what it is for now. And it's not fair. Like, life isn't fair. We can't always say, okay, well, the grade 12 of 2009 has to be the same grade 12 of 2013. I don't know that that's possible when there was a global pandemic and we had to change the way we lived forever, even now, right? And so when I think about these kind of studies and solutions, I'm like, wait, let's take a pause for a second. What is the issue with, and sometimes it's time, right? What is the issue with saying, okay, this student can, redo this semester, redo this grade? Maybe it's embarrassing. Maybe the parents are like, then they're going to be in school a year longer. We had planned for us to go on their 18th birthday to this place. And, there's a whole thing of time. But what if we just took a pause and said, hey, you could redo that grade. That's totally fine. What if we all just redid this grade? Because
honestly,
at that point, I don't know what happened online, right? I'm not saying there wasn't teaching, like teachers were going above and beyond online.
Yeah, but it was a hot mess.
It was a mess. Everyone knows it was a mess. And, the quality of learning online is not always the same if it's not an intentional online course that was prepared in advance. And so I feel like we don't have time for the pause on one hand, and we don't have time to think about all of the domains and places that are put together to be essential for education. Like you said, if it's about access, why don't we talk about, I don't know, clean water access in communities, right? If it's about access, why don't we talk about restructuring the medical system? If it's about access, why don't we talk about, all these things that I feel like if we're going to change education, there's so many sectors. And that's why I almost feel like, sorry, I'm cutting myself off. I almost feel like it's setting us as educators up for failure because they're putting it all on education to fix education when we've already proved that education is about everything in society, right? We educate people to do every job. We are the parents, the educators, the teachers of the doctors, the lawyers, the CEOs, they came from us, right? And we can't
Honestly,
even do our job correctly because there's no supports in place. So that's why I just feel like there's something that's missing in terms of the wider community that isn't connected enough to actually make those changes. And if
yes.
we're going to, vote in these, and again, this is not even to say that you should vote one way or another, but if you're going to vote for a government that wants the most, the lowest taxes with no social services, and they want to keep the rich people rich, these are the outcomes of education.
Yes.
This is what's going to happen.
Literally, I think that student outcomes in education are wonderful thermometers for how, or like a health test for how your community is doing.
Yeah.
Because if the student outcomes are low, I venture to surmise that the community health is low in terms of access to adequate, again, life sustaining resources, things for people to feel connected in community with one another, proper health care. And like honestly, to answer your question about like, or to speak to, not even answer, I'm not answering things. To speak to your point about like, there needs to be changes in healthcare, and like if we know it's about access, why aren't we providing that? And it's because of money. Let's just be honest. Like giving everyone access comes at the cost of a few people's exclusivity.
Yeah.
And that is not something that those few people are very keen on giving up.
Yeah.
And what they will often do instead is just take it all. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we're arguing. It's just like the kid, in class or who has a toy. And when they start losing or when they appear to be not having the most attention, they just take everything and go. Yeah. That's kind of the mindset in education, unfortunately, in terms of like providing greater access. And that's why what we're seeing throughout the landscape is an attack on education. Yeah. It's just like they're constructing straw men in education and then destroying that at the expense of the system. Like nobody's raising your child in the classroom to be like some, I don't know, radical person that's going to throw a coup over the government because they have learned about Black History Month, or Black history, or the history of America. Like the truth is,
they're going to be more compassionate human beings. They're going to actually care about people that are around them. They're going to know the history of their own country.
And I think that it's the Western mindset that being uncomfortable and in pain, or not in pain, like uncomfortable or feeling hurt is like equivalent to being violenced against is wild. Because I think it is important for white children to like reckon with the way that white people have historically treated folks of color throughout history. I think that should make them sad and make them hurt. And I think that it should make them feel shame. Yeah. And I think the shame is learned, and the shame is reinforced at home, and the shame is then blamed on everyone else.
Right.
What it should make them feel is conviction, which is to say that those behaviors were so shameful that I will never do them. You know what I mean? That's what they should be taking away from the truth of America, such that we don't experience some of the horrible things that we are. But instead, you have people that are screaming about CRT that don't even understand what it is, who are screaming about, acting like we're about to have drag brunch in the kindergarten. You know what I mean? Like things that are not happening,
right?
Or things that are not harmful, or let me just put it this way, not the things that are actually harming their kids. You know what I mean? Right. They're advocating to destroy those things to reduce access to those books, reducing access to that money, so that people won't want to go to public schools anymore, because there's not going to be any teachers, not going to be any curriculum, not going to be any money, not going to be any access. They're going to, throw vouchers and tell everyone to go to private school, then hike up the prices so the vouchers can't cover it no more, and all the poor kids will have to go back to public school, and the rich kids will have coupons for their private school. You know what I mean? Like it's just like that's the destroying of the system that we're seeing, and it makes me rageful, because I think that it's just, again, like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if we continue to strip education away to its bare bones and focus on improving student outcomes, which is wild. Again, you cannot improve student outcomes without improving the community. It is student outcomes are strictly a thermometer that implicates the health of the community. If the students are not okay, the community's not okay. So you can't do anything to change those outcomes if you don't change the community. It's pointless. It's duct tape.
Yeah. I know, preach. I genuinely didn't even know our conversation would go here, but I'm obsessed with it. Like, I think I was like, oh, how are we going to change education? Let's talk about some practical. No, this is like systemic stuff. And I also feel like at Harvard specifically, the courses that I took that felt the most compelling to me, that felt like, wow, I'm going to be a change maker, I'm going to imagine the future differently, were like the most airy fairy courses. It was me
Yes.
doing fugitive negotiations and actually
Hmm.
imagining a world where I'm like, what kind of social services could I create? And I was like crying in this class because it was so emotional in the best way possible. And I
Yes.
was imagining this community where there was like this assignment that I did, it was a community where there were emergency response responders, but to conflict and helping people through conflict. So almost like you're calling 911, but it's like for something interpersonal, but you
Yeah.
really want to, get to the root of it and solve it and get that healing in the moment,
Yeah.
for example. And even things like a non-emergency 911 call, but instead you'd call these people, like these services, and they would
Hmm.
come with a bit more healing, more
Yes.
holistic, more personal. And I love that idea. And I still think about that idea sometimes, like how it
Mhm.
would work in practice, what would it be? But our society doesn't really have that, right? Like we have
Yeah.
keep your silo. If there's an issue, don't talk about it. If there's an issue in your
Yeah.
family, don't talk about it. And then only for big emergencies, like there is blood on the floor, do you call someone for help? Right. And I don't know if
Yeah.
that's like the best strategy, but I also felt less compelled. Not that it's not important. I always felt less compelled by the data points only because I'm like, are we even there yet? Like, we have so many things to solve. And I almost chuckled. I mean, I probably did chuckle at, I don't know which, I don't even think it was a course. I'm not sure. But they were talking about grade threes being college and career ready. And I was like, what is the United States? Like, I'm leaving.
Like this is
I was thinking, this is so weird. Like this is a study. Like this is real, and it was not a joke. I thought it was a joke. I was like, oh, okay,
mhm.
grade three is being college and career ready. Okay, like we need to take it down a notch because at
Yeah.
that point we're like preparing 9-year-olds to go to college. Like they're trying to learn the world. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to learn how to be a good human being, and they barely know math at that point. Like I
Mhm.
don't know how we're talking about college and career readiness.
It's
It's
and
so
it's
strange.
at this point it feels like propaganda. Like, what
It's
do
so
you
strange.
mean? Like, good lord, these kids, like
Yeah.
you said, they're trying to figure out colors and
But
and all this
yeah.
other stuff, and
Yeah, and like you said, it's the fact that the grade threes, let's say they can determine, because I think that was a part of the study, that they actually
mm,
can determine their college and career readiness by grade three. If they take those same students from a longitudinal study and they say, okay, look, these same students that were performing, we can see that they'll actually A, graduate high school, and B, go to college. But like you said, we're not going to be surprised about who it is because we know the students with more access, with richer parents, with they're not going to not graduate, right? Like they're of course going to go to university or college. And so it's like, sure, we can do that study. We can prepare them by grade three to make sure that the curriculum, everything's up to date. But also, are we shocked at who it is? Like, we're never shocked. It's not like, oh no, this like middle class to rich student with all the money and access in the world didn't get grade three science. They're not going to graduate high school and they're not going to go to university. Like, they will still go and they'll still find a way to get there, right? It's the other students that may have not gotten the best curriculum and don't have the access, and their teachers don't like them, and there's discrimination in their school. And like those are the kids who don't make it, right? Yeah.
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 I like honestly, I love these. There's so many things to respond to. First of all, like you, it's like we keep going, and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my god, this. But I do like the idea of like imagining a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I like the idea, like you brought up the response team in communities, and I've
Yeah.
heard that before, right? Like sometimes conflicts don't. Most times, I will argue, and maybe even all the time, that the conflicts don't need the police to solve them. You know,
Right.
like if someone is even having a dispute that's violent, I wish there was
Right.
ways that people could like know how to respond to that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I understand like definitely life threatening situations are a different story, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking about people who have like mental health crises and who
Yeah.
may be behaving violently.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are professionals who know how to navigate those circumstances. I wish there were more professionals that knew how to navigate those circumstances and who
Mm-hmm.
can help mitigate those situations rather than police who don't know how to respond other than what they do. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? But I also think even in education, like I wish I could imagine a world where we would see student outcomes and it would be like something that the community would see, right? We'd be like, hey, this is how the students are doing in our community. And the solutions then aren't like you said, the cop out isn't on the education system.
Yeah.
Like it should be like, hey, community, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
We've
Like a
noticed that half
poster.
of our residents have this,
Yeah. In
and
front of
half
your
of our
town
residents
hall. Here's what
yeah,
we're
like
doing.
it's town hall. We're coming together. We're like, our
Yep.
students are not okay. What do we all need to do to
Yep.
advocate for them, to provide for them? What resources do they need? And then
Yep.
you check the outcomes later to see if they have been improved.
Yeah.
You know
How
what
can
I
we
mean? It should
respond to
be,
each other? Yeah.
yeah, it should be a coordinated effort. Like, okay, school system, y'all do your thing. Sure, you have funding. Okay, but also how can the healthcare system make sure that students have access to, like the almost like the community schools kind of model that I see
Yeah.
popping up around the country where they try to have more holistic and coordinated systems and provide greater access to not only the students but also their families, etc. Like I think I would love to like have that sort of school where like the community again has input on like what they need and how they can voice what their families are struggling through or what they can offer, etc., and share resources in that way. And then, it's not about like, well, we need to pull our kids out of the school. We need to punish that school. We need to F. You know what I mean? It's not
Yeah.
that. Instead, it's about like this community is clearly needing something. How can we help this community in need? And I
Mm-hmm.
also wish that like going down to like you said, students, they're getting the bad card of like being apathetic, but really like they need more agency. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think we're giving them less when we
Right.
focus on how to like I don't know emphasize their deficits rather than I don't know improving their strengths, and we're blaming them for how they've come up, which is again feels like gaslighting, and I think
Yeah.
that's a horrible way to start a relationship. And also it shouldn't be it's just like parents who have
Yeah.
like children that they have neglected and they're like, well, when you grew up you come to me when you're ready, and it's like, no, you have to do the most work.
Yeah.
You were responsible for this child and you dropped the ball, and so now you have to do way more work later
Like
to
you said,
repair that.
the
And I think
repair.
that's like the case of like the government, etc. Like they got to do twice the work, and
Yeah.
to come down on parents and teachers is wild, because
Yeah.
even parents shouldn't have as much responsibility for their children as they do. And I know it's wild to say, but what I'm actually saying is not that they don't have the need to take care of them, but it's like you assume parents have a chip in their head that's linked to their child, and therefore if they hit that, the child will behave differently.
Right.
Nobody, like, human psychology is way too complicated.
Right.
Parents aren't equipped with human psychology knowledge, and so
Right.
to think that like if their child is failing, a parent should automatically know how to address that is
Right.
wild.
Right.
To assume they have the resources to is wild. And third, to assume that they weren't students themselves was wild. Like one of
Right.
my favorite courses at Harvard was like the what, why, and how of school, family, community partnerships. And one of our first
Yeah.
lessons was deconstructing the way that people talk about parents and their role. Like parents don't care, parents aren't active, they're not responsive. When really we're neglecting to realize that this society doesn't allow for us to be good parents. Like people have to
Yeah.
work and aren't getting paid. Like people don't have access to adequate mental health supports. There's not any parental supports in this country that are sufficient. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And often people as individuals or as a couple, that's like really not enough to care for a child. Like you need more of that. And frankly, we just don't live in a country that values community support with children. So it's not a thing that people
Yeah.
even have access to consistently. And so parents can't just you can't assume that because they're not succeeding and their child is doing well that they know and they
Right.
have access and they have like support. And even if there is a case where there's just like a parent who has these malicious intent, it's unfortunate that that's the only person that's caring for the child. Like they don't
Right.
have
Right.
other people in their lives often, or can be the case. And so it's wild that parents have to bear the responsibility, and teachers, because again, their role is to teach and provide instruction, but they also have to parent kids. They also have to feed kids. They also have to be their
Yeah.
emotional support. They
Yeah.
have to be de facto therapists because kids don't have access to that all the time. They have to,
Yeah.
there's a lot that they have to care for. And then you have to meet the requirements of a district that's constantly thumping at you to do some stuff that aren't even listening to what you're saying is your issue. You don't have
Right.
support and there's not enough money. There's way too much.
Yeah.
Even principals.
Yeah.
Principals are nothing more than middle managers. You know what I mean? That's all they are. They make the schedule. You know what I mean? They do the payroll. They deal with the upper management. They deal with the boss. You know what I mean? They deal with the superintendent. They deal with the angry customers.
Yeah.
Parents.
They're hearing the bottom, and then they're like, the top is like, and they're like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to tell you. I'm the liaison to, and
they're literally like store managers. That's all a principal is. And that's stressful. They don't have enough support. They're really not paying enough.
No, right.
And they're the face of a school. So they got to answer for everybody. And then the superintendent, honestly, I think that's an even harder job.
Yeah.
It's hard as well because they are in charge of directing education and being responsible for the role of education.
What is our strategy? What are our values? Where are all the schools going to go?
Often figuring out how the heck to take policy that's passed from like the state, the government, etc., and put it into implementation.
Yeah.
When often policy writers are really bad at writing school policy. And I'm saying this as a person who's had to read legislation for school policy and realize how much of that stuff is just vague, unclear. They want you to do something, but also aren't passing resources for it, or not enough, or not in time. And how are we supposed to do this? And what does that mean? What law is that referring to?
Yeah, it's so confusing.
And it's why I hire people like us to do it for them.
And you're like, so back to my job.
Yeah, literally.
No, but that's fair, and it's confusing how to get started, I guess. It feels like a kind of a maze where you're like, oh, well, we could start here. We could start with health. We could start with this. We could start with environment. We can start. There's so many areas. I mean, again, I'll say it all the time. I'm a chaotic Gemini and I have many ideas. And sometimes I want to do all of these things. And I'm like, how can I do all of these things at once? If I could just do this, and then talk to the community and then talk to the community, this person, and I lose my mind in this kind of train of thought of what I could do.
Yeah.
And I still don't feel like I'm a grown up in a way. Like I'm like, when I grow up, I'm going to do these things. When I grow up one day, when I'm 50. And
literally.
Yeah, I feel like there's a way to do it. I don't know how, but my phrase, what I like to say is that we are all policymakers because I'm confused about policymaking and I went to school for policymaking and I'm still confused about policymaking. And I
feel like policymakers are confused about policymaking.
I think what confuses me is that a lot of things get done when people are loud about things. And when there's a mobilization, like there's a group of people who agitate and they talk about a certain issue, and then the change seems to happen. So I'm like, okay, so we are actually the policymaker. You know what I mean? Like if we did nothing and stayed silent forever about everything, nothing would change, and then they would just go on with their own agenda. Okay, we're going to increase tax. Okay, we're going to lower tax. Okay, and you're like, okay, sounds good. There would be no voice, right? But then if we said, okay, actually, I dislike what you're doing. Now we're going to, protest, or now we're going to say, actually, I don't like this bill that's coming out, or whatever it is. That's when change happens. So then I'm like, oh, we actually have the power, right? Like we have the power, which is why I wonder, it's about that pause, right? If we bring it back to that pause, I don't think we want to take the pause to just say, hey, what if we just collected, not like literally like a study, but just kind of took inventory. What's happening here? What do we want in our school, in our community? It's really hard to do that on a mass scale. If you had a small school, you could gather all the parents one evening, gather the parents and students another, like you could do that, but it's really hard to do that in a community, in a society, and be like, what do we all want? And to agree is impossible because we all have different interests. We have different values. We don't want the same things, but what outcome could benefit most of us or would be beneficial for most of us, I'm honestly not sure. I have a question just to kind of close off. We're going into our time and I'm like, wow, this conversation we could just go for 3 hours, literally, to be honest. But if you had children, would you send them to public school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the public school.
Okay.
I think it's important to be invested in public school,
Yeah.
especially as a citizen and as a person in a community. If I
Yeah.
have kids one day, I would send them to public school. I
Yeah.
hope that more people send their kids to public school, and I would be an active parent in
Yeah.
public schools. They would know
Yeah.
me. They would know
Right.
me. I'd be there. I would be there for my child. I would be there for the other children in the school.
Yeah.
I'd be there for the teachers. I'd be there for the principal. I would be there,
Yeah.
and I would be an advocate, at least to the best of my ability, because I already know this country is crushing everybody. So like,
Right.
we all have time to be Martin Luther King, but
No.
yeah,
You can have a Rosa Parks moment. You can
maybe
do
I was
something in the
just,
school.
that's right. I would do
Yeah.
that. I mean, I would be a really good advocate for students in the public school system in the future of wherever I send my child to.
I love that. I love that. No, I agree. I feel the same way. I mean, I went to public school, right? And it's different. Like we're from two different contexts, but still public schools or public education is
Yeah.
always either under attack
Mm-hmm.
or it's like looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that. And I want it to just be like the place to go. This is where you want to send your kids. You shouldn't want to look somewhere else. But I get that there are reasons for private schools and
Yeah,
different
of
types of
course.
communities. Like I completely understand that. And I don't
Of
think that
course.
private schools need to be completely abolished necessarily. But
Yeah.
in a perfect world, public school is the most accessible and it has the best
Mm-hmm.
resources and things that we're paying for, right? So
It's
I
a
feel
public
like
good. Yeah.
exactly. So no, I would also send my future theoretical child to public school, but I
Yeah.
wanted to end on a more positive note. What do you see the future of education being? I've asked this to a couple of different people on the podcast, but what do you see for the future of education? What's one thing that you feel either in your work that you've seen or that something innovative that you feel excited about that feels like the future is bright?
Mhm. I think, well, there's a couple things. I know this is
Okay.
probably, the first one is probably not super great sounding, but
Okay.
I am excited about it and very happy for people to like check me on that if it's not something to be excited about. But I'm very excited for AI in education. And the reason
Okay.
I'm excited for it is because I really feel like it'll facilitate the transition away from us focusing so much on those concrete skills and instead focusing on how to be stronger critical thinkers if
Yeah.
we know how to use it effectively. Like I
Yeah.
use AI a lot in my work. I use ChatGPT, for example,
Yeah.
and I don't use it to like, it's not, I guess like people are afraid that ChatGPT will give students a cop out, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be an effective tool to teach students how to delegate. Because
Yeah.
frankly, that's what I use it to do. Like I
Yes.
wanted to help me support making things. I needed to
Yeah.
help me reframe my thinking. I needed to help me do X, Y, and Z. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in order to effectively use a tool like that, you have to be a strong critical thinker and able to delegate effectively and know how to ask for information that you need. And I think
Yeah.
that those are important skills. And I wish that schools would leverage those and think about how to change what they're expecting to respond to that
Yeah.
rather than keep it from students. And I think that's one thing. And then another thing that I'm really excited about is I think hmm, I think I'm excited for like more the way that I'm seeing more synergy between schools and communities. Like I know that there's a growing community schools movement which really does bring like resources and education and families together, and I think that's going to be really important for like communities that are economically disadvantaged or things like that where families need access and students need access. I feel like that's more holistic, and so I hope that trends upward and is a thing that we see more broadly. And I also hope that we'll continue this path toward straightening, as amigos would call it, where we just like say things as they are and like set things straight, set the record straight, and be real
Yeah.
about things. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Hope that answers your
No,
question.
it does. It does. Thank you. No, I love that answer. And just to make a small comment on the first point that you made, I remember when I was teaching, I was a huge stickler about plagiarism. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
listen, if you want to plagiarize, don't be in my class. Like, just leave me alone. Like, I have no time. I have zero
Mm-hmm.
time. But I always was interested in, like you said, like the AI, or I mean, at that time, ChatGPT wasn't out when I was teaching,
Yeah.
but I had these assignments in collaboration with other teachers where it was really difficult for them to plagiarize. Sure, they could Google, right? They
Yeah.
could, Google, get some, yeah, like you said, a framework, but really, I would know if they put in the critical thinking. Nothing out, like not one platform could do the thinking that I was asking them to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to innovate your teaching practice as well to keep up with those standards, which is hard. And sometimes teachers don't want to change. And they're just like, listen, I have
Mm-hmm.
my lesson plan. I have the essay I want them to write. Why was Great Gatsby great? And they want to end it there. And I'm like, AI could tell you why Great Gatsby was great or not great, right? Easy.
Mm-hmm.
But how can you connect Great Gatsby to yourself and to a part of yourself? Take a theme and now bring it back to you. How is AI going to talk about that
Mm-hmm.
with a
Mm-hmm.
literary analysis? It's
Mm-hmm.
not, because you're a unique person. So there's things that I had to update in my teaching practice
Mm-hmm.
to keep up with the fact that they are on their phone and computer all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I know how to Google search. I'm not asking you to do a Google search for me. I can
You're
do it
asking
better
them to
than you,
think.
actually.
You're asking them to
So,
think.
yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. No, thank you for that. And thank you so much for being on this podcast. We'll end it right there. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope that you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also on YouTube at Miss Education. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.